They thought I would quietly hand over the keys to the data center and smile while doing paperwork in the corner. I smiled, yes, but not for the reason they expected. Because when the audit arrived and asked one simple question, the room suddenly felt much smaller. The data center had its own kind of silence, not the peaceful one, but the humming, electric kind. Racks blinked like distant constellations, cooling units breathed steadily, and the raised floor carried the faint vibration of responsibility. I had spent 8 years inside that hum, 8 years knowing which server would blink amber before failing, which backup generator needed coaxing on humid mornings, which log file whispered trouble before it screamed. And then, one Monday, the owner decided legacy mattered more than logic. "My son takes over. You do paperwork," he said, leaning back in a chair that had never once been inside the server room. The sunlight through his office window fell across framed photos of ribbon cuttings and handshakes. None of them showed the cables beneath the building, the arteries that kept his empire breathing. I nodded, calm, professional. My pulse, however, tightened like a pulled cable tie. His son, Daniel, stood beside him in a suit too sharp for the fluorescent lighting. He smelled like new cologne and old certainty. He had visited the data center twice, once for a photo, once because the Wi-Fi was slow in the lobby. "I'll need a full handover," Daniel said brightly. "Access maps, vendor contacts, emergency procedures, the works." The works, as if it were a recipe card. I looked at him carefully. "Of course," I replied, "but I won't be training you." Silence, the kind that isn't electrical, the human kind. It pressed against the glass walls of the office. The owner blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'll continue fulfilling my contractual duties," I said evenly. "Documentation, reporting, compliance updates." "But training a replacement for my own role is not in my job description." Daniel's smile faltered just slightly on a flicker, like a server losing power for half a second. Tiny, but visible. The owner cleared his throat. "We're a family company." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm staying professional." That was the moment something shifted. Subtle, almost polite. I wasn't shouting, I wasn't storming out, I was simply refusing to hold the ladder steady while someone kicked it away. And that unsettled them. By Wednesday, my inbox carried a new subject line, transition timeline. By Thursday, Daniel had begun appearing in the data center without warning, stepping carefully over floor tiles as if they might stain his shoes. "Show me the redundancy layout," he said one afternoon, glancing around at the rows of equipment. "It's documented in the system," I answered. "Folder, infrastructure, subfolder, critical paths." He stared at the terminal screen longer than necessary. The cursor blinked at him like a metronome counting down patience. "You could just walk me through it," he insisted. "I could," I agreed gently, "but I won't." The hum of the cooling units seemed louder that day, almost amused. Over the next week, small cracks began to show. A backup verification task was postponed because Daniel didn't understand the scheduling interface. A vendor call was rescheduled twice because he wasn't sure which contract applied to which rack cluster. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet. Just enough friction to create heat. Then came the email that made my chest tighten for a different reason. Subject: External Utility Audit, Data Center Energy Compliance Review. Audit. The word moved through the building like a draft under a door. Energy usage, load balancing, cooling efficiency, compliance logs, every line of documentation I had maintained with meticulous precision was about to be examined by people who did not care about family ties. Daniel walked into the data center that afternoon, looking paler than usual. "You handled previous audits, right?" he asked. Yes. You'll assist me? I turned in my chair slowly. I'll provide documentation, as per my role. His jaw flexed. You're being difficult. No, I said calmly. I'm being exact. Another silence, this one sharper. The days leading up to the audit felt like a storm building somewhere beyond the horizon. You could smell it in the air. Metallic, expectant. Daniel began requesting files he didn't know how to interpret. He asked about PUE ratios without understanding what they represented. He skimmed cooling performance charts as if they were decorative. And each time, I answered precisely what was asked, nothing more, nothing less. 2 days before the audit, he stopped by my desk. If something goes wrong, he said quietly, it's on you. I looked up from the compliance spreadsheet I was updating. Is it? His confidence flickered again. The night before the audit, I stayed late, not out of obligation, but out of habit. I walked between the server racks, checking indicator lights, listening to the rhythm I knew by heart. Everything was in order. Documentation updated, logs complete, contingency procedures printed and filed. The data center was ready. The question was Daniel? Morning arrived with polished shoes and official badges. The auditors moved methodically, scanning panels, reviewing reports, asking precise, neutral questions. Their presence felt like a mirror held up to the building. Daniel led them, speaking quickly, confidently, almost too confidently. Then one of the auditors paused near the primary monitoring console. Who is responsible for the data center? She asked. Simple, direct, neutral. Daniel opened his mouth, and for the first time he hesitated. If you think that pause lasted only a second, you weren't in that room. And if you've ever watched confidence evaporate under fluorescent lights, you already know why what happened next changed everything. That pause did not echo. It tightened. Daniel's mouth remained slightly open, as if the correct answer might float in from the cooling vents. The auditors stood still, tablets in hand, eyes patient and sharp. The hum of the data center continued its steady rhythm, indifferent to hierarchy. Well, Daniel began, adjusting his cufflinks, I oversee operations. The lead auditor tilted her head. Oversee or are responsible? A subtle difference, a devastating one. The owner, who had arrived to observe, shifted his weight near the door. He had never liked technical rooms. They lacked applause. Daniel gestured vaguely toward me. She manages documentation and reporting. The auditor's gaze moved to me, calm, evaluating, professional. And your title? Senior Infrastructure Manager, I replied evenly. Are you responsible for uptime, redundancy architecture, and compliance logs? Yes. Daniel's jaw tightened. We're in transition. Documented? The auditor asked. Silence again, thinner this time. The auditor requested access to the energy load distribution dashboard. Daniel stepped toward the console with rehearsed confidence. His password attempt failed. Once, twice, a third time. Would you like assistance? I asked gently. His nostrils flared. I've got it. He didn't. The lead auditor watched without expression. For compliance purposes, we need to confirm who has operational control. The word control seemed to hover in the air like dust caught in server light. I folded my hands calmly. My access has not been revoked. Daniel turned toward me, his voice low. You could make this easier. I am, I said quietly. The cooling system's airflow shifted slightly, a soft mechanical sigh. The audit continued. Power usage effectiveness metrics were requested. Backup generator maintenance logs. Temperature fluctuation reports from the past 12 months. Each file I had maintained with disciplined precision appeared on screen, time-stamped, categorized, traceable. Daniel tried to narrate the data. He mixed terminology, confused redundancy with load balancing, referenced a vendor contract that had expired last quarter, something I had updated and archived. The auditor corrected him gently. Not unkind, just factual. Facts can be colder than any server room. Then came the question that changed the temperature entirely. In the event of a cooling failure cascade, the auditor asked, who executes the emergency protocol? Daniel inhaled sharply. I felt the owner's gaze on my back. Well, Daniel said, the team. Name, the auditor clarified. A name. There are moments when truth does not raise its voice. It simply stands there, waiting to be acknowledged. Daniel looked at me, and in that look was frustration, pride, and something dangerously close to panic. She does, he admitted finally. The auditor typed something into her tablet. The owner stepped forward. This is a family business. My son is stepping into leadership. The auditor offered a polite smile. Leadership is noted. Responsibility must be documented. The difference landed heavily. The review shifted deeper into energy compliance. One cooling unit's efficiency variance from 3 months ago was flagged. Daniel frowned, unfamiliar with the incident. That was during the heat wave, I explained calmly. We rerouted load distribution and prevented downtime. Full report attached in the log. The auditor nodded. Mitigation was handled correctly. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. The owner's jaw tightened. The room no longer felt small. It felt revealing. As the session concluded, the lead auditor closed her tablet and asked the final question, the one that would determine not only compliance status, but accountability. For our official report, she said, who is designated as the responsible authority for the data center at this time? No metaphors, no interpretation, just designation. Daniel looked at his father. His father did not answer. Because documentation does not care about legacy, systems do not respond to surnames, and electricity does not negotiate with ego. The owner cleared his throat slowly. At present, she is. The words tasted unfamiliar in the air. The auditor nodded once. Thank you for the clarification. Clarification. Such a gentle word for such a public correction. After they left, silence returned. But it was different now, thicker, charged. Daniel turned toward me, anger flashing briefly across his face before being swallowed by calculation. You could have supported me, he said. I supported the system, I replied. The owner didn't meet my eyes. By evening, an internal email circulated. Temporary operational responsibility. Infrastructure Department. My name was listed. Officially. Clearly. Documented. Temporary. But documented. If you've ever seen power shift without a single raised voice, you know it doesn't happen loudly. It happens in writing. And once it's written, it becomes very difficult to erase. The owner believed this was a pause. Daniel believed this was a setback. Neither of them yet understood what documentation really means when the next review comes. And what question might be asked then? If you think this was the end of it, you haven't seen what happens when reputation enters the room. Sometimes the quietest decisions create the loudest consequences. Subscribe and share your thoughts. Should she have done anything differently? The building felt different the next morning, not visibly. The same polished floors, the same coffee machine that hissed like it had secrets, the same elevator mirror reflecting faces already rehearsing their confidence. But beneath it, under the carpet, behind the drywall, beneath the raised floor of the data center, something had shifted. Documentation had spoken, and documentation, unlike pride, leaves a paper trail. By noon, the internal memo had done its quiet work. My name was now attached to operational responsibility, data center infrastructure in black formal text. Temporary, yes, but official. That word travels fast in corporate hallways. Daniel avoided the server room that day. Instead, he held meetings upstairs, doors closed, voices low. I passed by once to refill my water bottle and caught only fragments. Optics, long-term structure, perception of leadership. Perception, a beautiful word, flexible, convenient, unlike audit logs. Inside the data center, the air felt cool and steady as always. I ran routine checks, verified redundancy paths, reviewed energy consumption curves. The systems responded the way they always had, predictably, loyally, indifferent to office politics. Predictability is comforting, it's also powerful. Mid-afternoon, an email arrived marked high priority. Subject: follow-up documentation request. Utility Compliance Board. I opened it carefully. The audit team required additional clarification on projected energy scaling for the upcoming quarter. They wanted to know whether infrastructure expansion plans aligned with current cooling capacity. A reasonable question, except expansion had been discussed enthusiastically by Daniel during a leadership meeting, without consulting capacity reports. I leaned back slowly. 2 months ago, I had submitted a recommendation: upgrade secondary cooling units before approving new rack installations. It had been acknowledged, filed, not funded. Now the math was about to be examined by people who understood numbers better than ambition. Daniel appeared at my desk 10 minutes later, holding a printed copy of the email. You saw this? Yes. We need projections? They're in the infrastructure planning folder. He hesitated. Updated projections. Expansion assumptions haven't been approved, I said calmly. They will be. Then they should be documented first. A flicker again, that unstable half-second of uncertainty. He lowered his voice. Look, he said, forcing steadiness. The board expects growth. The systems expect preparation. His jaw tightened. The conversation ended there, but tension lingered like static in dry air. That evening, he sent a company-wide message announcing strategic expansion of digital capacity. Bold language, confident tone, no mention of cooling upgrades. The data center hummed below it all, unaware of ambition. The next morning, the Utility Compliance Board joined via video conference for clarification. 3 faces on screen, calm, neutral, analytical. Daniel presented slides, growth forecasts, market opportunities, increased digital footprint. Then came the question: have the secondary cooling systems been upgraded to accommodate the projected load increase? Daniel paused. He clicked to the next slide too quickly. We're evaluating options. The board member leaned forward slightly. Our review indicates current cooling operates at 87% peak capacity during summer cycles. Silence. Numbers do not whisper. They state. I watched Daniel's reflection in the glass of the server rack beside me. His confidence was thinning. Operational responsibility currently sits with infrastructure, another board member said. Can we hear from the responsible manager? 3 faces on screen turned toward me. The owner, sitting beside Daniel upstairs, shifted in his chair. I adjusted my headset. Current cooling infrastructure supports existing load with safe redundancy margins, I began evenly. Projected expansion without secondary unit upgrades would exceed optimal thresholds during seasonal peaks. No drama, just data. What is your professional recommendation? The board member asked. Upgrade before expansion. Simple. The owner's expression tightened. Daniel's eyes flicked toward his father. searching for reinforcement that did not arrive. The board thanked us and ended the call. Silence again, but this one felt heavier. Within the hour, another memo circulated. Expansion plan, pending infrastructure review. Pending, a soft corporate word for halted. Daniel appeared in the data center late that afternoon. No suit jacket this time, just rolled sleeves and visible frustration. "You could have framed that differently," he said. "I framed it accurately." "You embarrassed me." I answered a direct question. His breath was sharp, controlled. "You're enjoying this," he accused quietly. I looked around at the blinking servers, the steady green indicators, the quiet order of cables labeled with meticulous care. "No," I said. "I'm protecting this." The truth settled between us. Not cruel, not triumphant, just firm. He studied the racks for a long moment, perhaps realizing for the first time how little he understood about the systems he wanted to command. "You think documentation makes you untouchable?" he asked. "No," I replied. "It makes the company stable." Another silence. Above us, somewhere in the executive floor, decisions were recalculating. Reputation had entered the conversation now. Not just authority, credibility. 2 days later, HR requested a formal clarification of role definitions to ensure alignment during transitional leadership phases. Alignment, that word never arrives alone. If you've ever watched ambition collide with compliance, you know it doesn't explode. It erodes, quietly, persistently, until only what's structurally sound remains. And something told me the next erosion wouldn't be mine. HR scheduled the alignment meeting for Friday at 9 a.m., which in corporate language means bring documentation and composure. The conference room overlooked the city, all glass and horizon. Sunlight poured across the polished table, illuminating neatly arranged notepads as if this were a collaboration instead of a recalibration. The owner sat at the head, Daniel to his right, HR across from them, smiling the careful smile of someone trained to soften impact. I took my seat with a folder. Printed logs, role descriptions, compliance records, not as a weapon, as gravity. "Thank you for coming," HR began smoothly. "We want clarity during this transition phase." Transition again. The word was starting to feel decorative. Daniel leaned forward. "There's been confusion about authority lines." "Authority lines." I folded my hands. Operational responsibility was clarified during the audit. The owner exhaled slowly. "Temporarily." "Documented," I replied. The air shifted. HR opened a digital file. "Let's review the job descriptions." Daniel's title: Executive Operations Lead. Broad language, strategic oversight, growth initiatives. Mine, Senior Infrastructure Manager. Direct responsibility for uptime, compliance, system architecture, vendor contracts, emergency protocol execution. Words matter, especially when they're written before conflict begins. Daniel tapped his pen against the table. "It's unreasonable for infrastructure decisions to slow strategic expansion." "Is it unreasonable," I asked calmly, "to prevent regulatory penalties?" The owner's gaze sharpened. HR interjected gently. "No one is suggesting negligence." But that word had entered the room now. Even unspoken, it lingered. I slid one document across the table. Energy capacity projections, seasonal stress curves, highlighted thresholds. "These were submitted 2 months ago," I said evenly. "Recommendation: upgrade secondary cooling before expansion." The owner glanced at the date. His expression tightened. Not at me. At the timestamp. Daniel shifted in his chair. "Budgets were under review." "And the review paused the upgrade," I said. "Not the physics." Silence. Sunlight reflected off the glass wall behind them, casting faint distortions, like cracks that weren't really there. HR cleared her throat. Let's focus on structure. Who signs off on expansion? Daniel answered immediately. I do. And who signs off on infrastructure readiness? HR continued. I met her gaze. I do. 2 signatures, 2 responsibilities, 1 system. The owner leaned back slowly. The sound of leather against the chair felt louder than it should have. So, what are you proposing? He asked. I held his gaze steady. Clear boundaries. Expansion initiatives require written infrastructure clearance. Infrastructure upgrades require approved funding timelines. No ambiguity. Daniel let out a quiet laugh, sharp, almost incredulous. You're setting conditions for me? No, I said. For the company? The difference hung between us. HR typed notes rapidly. Then the owner asked the question that truly mattered. If expansion is delayed and revenue growth slows, who bears responsibility? There it was, the pivot. I didn't rush my answer. If expansion proceeds without readiness and the data center fails compliance or experiences downtime, I said calmly, the entire company bears responsibility, including leadership. Leadership, the word landed carefully. Daniel's jaw flexed. He wanted confrontation. Something louder, something emotional, but there was nothing emotional in my tone, only structure. HR nodded slowly. It seems a dual signature process would mitigate risk. Mitigate. Corporate language for prevent disaster. The owner studied the documents again, the projections, the audit clarification, the timestamps that could not be rewritten. Finally, he spoke. Effective immediately, expansion plans require formal infrastructure approval before announcement. Daniel stiffened. Dad! This protects us, the owner said sharply. Protects, not him, not me. Us. The meeting ended without raised voices, no dramatic exits, just quiet restructuring, the kind that shifts power without spectacle. Back in the data center, the hum felt steadier than ever. I walked between the racks, fingertips brushing labeled cables. Order, logic, preparedness. An hour later, a company-wide email was sent. Subject, operational governance update, clear language, dual signature requirement, infrastructure clearance mandatory prior to expansion announcements. My name listed under infrastructure authority. Not temporary this time. Authority. Daniel didn't come downstairs that afternoon, but something else did. An email from the Utility Compliance Board confirming that our mitigation plan was noted positively in their report. Positively. Reputation had entered the ledger now. And reputation, once recalibrated, does not easily revert. If you think alignment meetings are about harmony, you haven't seen what happens when documentation quietly redraws the map. The summer heat arrived early that year. Outside, the city shimmered under a pale white sun. Inside the building, thermostats worked harder, air moved faster, and the data center carried a slightly sharper edge in its constant hum, like a violin string tuned just tight enough to sing. Peak season. The upgraded secondary cooling units had not yet been installed, because budgets, as it turned out, move slower than weather. I monitored the load curves closely. 82%, 84%, 86%. Predictable increases as external temperatures climbed. Not dangerous. Yet. Upstairs, expansion conversations had quieted. Daniel's once frequent announcements were now carefully phrased, pending infrastructure alignment. He avoided absolute statements. Experience had found its way into his vocabulary, reluctantly. On Tuesday afternoon, the first alert came. Cooling Unit B, efficiency drop detected. Not failure, just deviation. But deviation during peak heat is like a crack in glass under pressure. Small. Potentially significant. I stood immediately, pulling up diagnostic dashboards, airflow fluctuation, compressor cycling irregularly. Nothing catastrophic, yet the margins were thinner than I liked. Daniel appeared at the data center entrance within minutes. Someone had forwarded the alert. "What's happening?" he asked, tension barely masked. "Efficiency variance," I replied, already adjusting load distribution across racks, compensating through primary redundancy. "Is it critical?" "Not if handled correctly." The room felt warmer, not physically but atmospherically. Awareness changes temperature. I contacted the vendor listed in the maintenance contract, scheduled emergency inspection, logged incident report, adjusted non-essential load allocations. Calm is not the absence of risk. It is structured response. Daniel watched, silent this time. Another alert flickered. Internal temperature in one zone rising by 0.8 degrees above baseline. I rerouted airflow parameters manually, stabilized. The hum deepened, then steadied. Minutes stretched longer than usual, the kind that test whether preparation was real or theoretical. Daniel swallowed. "If this cascades..." "It won't," I said, not arrogant, certain. Because 2 months ago, when my cooling upgrade proposal was deferred, I had quietly optimized airflow mapping within existing limits, tightened inefficiencies, created small buffers invisible to anyone not studying thermal charts at midnight. Preparation rarely announces itself. The vendor technician arrived within the hour. Faulty compressor sensor, replaceable, preventable escalation avoided. By evening, efficiency returned to baseline. No downtime, no compliance breach, no public statement required. But upstairs, something fundamental had shifted again. The next morning, the owner requested a brief meeting. Just the three of us. No HR this time. No glass conference room. His private office. He looked older than he had during the audit. Not weaker, just aware. "I reviewed the incident report," he began. "Response time was impressive." I nodded slightly. "It's documented procedure." Daniel sat beside him, unusually quiet. The owner continued. "Had the system failed, the impact would have been significant." "Yes." "And you anticipated that risk months ago." "Yes." Silence, not tense, reflective. Daniel finally spoke. "I underestimated the operational complexity." Not an apology, not quite, but closer to truth than pride usually allows. "The data center isn't a symbol," I said gently. "It's a living system." The owner studied me carefully. "Effective immediately," he said slowly. "Infrastructure will report directly to me. Strategic expansion will require your formal capacity certification. Permanently. Permanently." The word settled differently than temporary had. Daniel didn't argue. Outside the office window, the city continued moving, unaware that beneath its digital heartbeat, a quiet recalibration had finalized. There was no celebration, no dramatic victory, just structural clarity. Back in the data center, I walked between the racks once more. Indicator lights blinked steadily, green, stable, balanced. The air felt cooler again, as if tension itself had dissipated. Power had not changed hands in a dramatic coup. It had clarified. Documentation had not defeated legacy. It had defined responsibility. And sometimes the strongest move isn't stepping forward. It's standing still, long enough for the system to reveal who truly holds it together.